A woman in her late 20s moved into an old apartment in a quiet, historic building. She immediately noticed odd occurrences. Objects would be moved around when no one was home, lights flickered, and she occasionally felt a cold presence. It started with small things, like a book out of place, or a picture frame tilted. At first, she thought it was just her imagination, or perhaps she had forgotten where she had left things. But as days turned into weeks, the occurrences became more frequent and harder to ignore. The lights would flicker at the same time every night, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The cold presence felt almost tangible, as if someone or something was watching her. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone in her own home. One evening, she was sitting on her couch when she felt an icy breeze pass by her. She looked over and saw a woman in a long, tattered dress standing in the doorway. Terrified, she jumped up and ran out. The next day, she found out that the building had once been the site of a tragic death. A woman had been murdered in the very apartment she was staying in by her abusive husband many years ago. The news sent chills down her spine, and she couldn't shake off the eerie feeling that had settled in her heart. She began to dig deeper into the history of the building, hoping to uncover more about the tragic event that had taken place. As she delved into old newspaper archives and spoke to longtime residents of the neighborhood, she learned that the woman, named Eleanor, had been a kind and gentle soul, loved by many. Her husband, however, was known for his violent temper and controlling nature. The couple had moved into the apartment shortly after their wedding, and it wasn't long before the neighbors began to hear the sounds of arguments and cries for help. One fateful night, the arguments escalated beyond control. The neighbors reported hearing a loud crash, followed by a chilling silence. The next morning, Eleanor's lifeless body was discovered by the landlord, and her husband was nowhere to be found. The police launched a manhunt, but he was never caught, leaving the case shrouded in mystery and sorrow. The more she learned about Eleanor's story, the more she felt a connection to the woman who had once lived in her apartment. She couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility to honor Eleanor's memory. The apartment, once a place of horror, now became a place of remembrance and reflection for her. After learning this, the woman tried to leave, but the ghost seemed to follow her, showing up in reflections in dark corners. Eventually, she reached out to a paranormal investigator who discovered the woman's spirit had been trapped there, unable to move on. With the help of a medium, the woman was able to help the spirit pass on. The ritual was intense, involving ancient chants and sacred symbols. The medium, surrounded by flickering candles, guided the spirit towards the light. As the spirit departed, a sense of peace filled the room, but it was fleeting. The apartment, once filled with an eerie presence, now felt cold and empty. The woman hoped for warmth to return, but for months the chill lingered. She often wondered if the spirit had truly found peace, or if remnants of its energy still haunted the space. Despite the emptiness, she found solace in knowing she had done all she could to help the spirit move on. The journey was over, but the memories of that night remained vivid in her mind. The woman moved out, and the place was never rented again. The package sat on my doorstep, wrapped in a delicate pink ribbon. Ironically, pink was her favorite color. It felt like a decade ago that we were together, laughing over silly things like favorite colors. Inside the package, a delicate silver locket. It was beautiful, engraved with our initials. It was a promise we made, a promise she broke. We were young and stupid, our love passionate and intense. But somewhere along the way, things changed. Her love morphed into something dark, possessive. The argument started escalating into screaming matches. Then came the threats. I broke things off, hoping she'd find peace. I should have known better. The note tucked beside the locket was simple, chilling. You can't escape us. The words sent shivers down my spine. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drum against my ribs. It was a threat, a promise. I could feel her presence, a dark cloud hovering over me. The early days were a blur of stolen kisses and whispered promises. We were inseparable, two halves of the same whole, or so I thought. Looking back, the red flags were there, flapping wildly in the wind, but I was too blinded by love to see them. Her possessiveness, masked as concern, her jealousy, disguised as affection, the constant calls, the endless texts. It was suffocating, but I mistook it for love. I was naive, foolishly believing that our love could conquer all. The argument started small, a forgotten phone call, a late night out with friends, but they escalated quickly, fueled by her paranoia and distrust. I found myself walking on eggshells, terrified of triggering another outburst. The first sign was the roses, a dozen long-stem red roses left on my doorstep. There was no card, no note, just the suffocating scent of her perfume clinging to the petals. Then came the phone calls, silent calls in the dead of night, her heavy breathing the only sound on the other end. Fear became my constant companion. I installed security cameras, changed my locks, informed the police. But it wasn't enough. Her presence was everywhere, a constant shadow lurking just beyond my sight. My home, once my sanctuary, now felt like a cage. I was trapped, suffocating under the weight of her obsession. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by a constant state of hypervigilance. Every creak of the floorboard, every rustle outside my window sent my heart racing. The stalking escalated, each incident more terrifying than the last. My tires were slashed, my mailbox vandalized with hateful messages. A dead rat, its lifeless eyes staring accusingly at me, was left on my doorstep. Her message was clear. I couldn't escape her. My friends became strangers, their concern tinged with fear. Even my family, usually my rock, seemed to distance themselves. I was alone, adrift in a sea of terror, the waves of her madness crashing over me. One night, I returned home to find my apartment door ajar. My blood ran cold. My heart pounded in my ears as I cautiously stepped inside. The air was thick with the cloying scent of her perfume. On my bed, a single red rose lay on a photograph of me, my eyes scratched out. The police were useless, their hands tied by bureaucracy. I was on my own. Fear morphed into anger, a burning rage that fueled my every move. I decided to confront her, to end this nightmare once and for all. I drove to her apartment, a ramshackle building on the outskirts of town. The air hung heavy with the stench of decay. With each step towards her door, my heart hammered louder. This was it. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, cluttered apartment. The air was thick with the scent of her perfume, mingled with something sickly sweet. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. Silence. An eerie, deafening silence. I pushed the door open further, stepping into the dimly lit apartment. Dust motes danced in the faint light, filtering through the grimy windows. The air was heavy, stagnant. Furniture was overturned, belongings strewn across the floor. It looked like a struggle, a desperate fight for survival. Then I saw it. On the coffee table, amidst the chaos, lay the silver locket. It lay open, revealing a faded picture of us, our faces scratched out, just like the one in the package. Beside it, a handwritten note. My blood ran cold. The note, written in shaky handwriting, read, "You can't escape us. We'll be together forever." The words echoed in my mind, a chilling reminder of her promise. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I had been wrong. It wasn't over. It would never be over. She was gone, but her obsession, her twisted love, lived on, and it was waiting for me. Mia was excited to marry her fiancé Dylan. Everything was perfect, except for one thing. Dylan's ex, Rachel, had died in a car accident shortly after their engagement. Mia had never met her, but she always felt uneasy about how much Dylan still talked about her. It wasn't just the frequency of his mentions. It was the way his eyes would glaze over, lost in memories. Mia tried to be understanding, knowing that grief has no timeline, but it was hard not to feel like a shadow in her own relationship. She often wondered if she was competing with a ghost, someone who would always be perfect in Dylan's mind because she was no longer there to make mistakes. The unease gnawed at her, especially during quiet moments when Dylan would retreat into his thoughts. Mia loved Dylan deeply, but she couldn't shake the feeling that part of his heart was still with Rachel. It was a silent struggle, one she didn't know how to voice without seeming insensitive. The weight of it hung over their otherwise happy life, a constant reminder of the past that refused to stay buried. One sunny afternoon, Mia was wandering through the quaint streets of her town when she stumbled upon an antique shop she had never noticed before. Drawn by curiosity, she decided to step inside. Among the many treasures, her eyes were immediately captivated by a beautiful vintage wedding dress hanging elegantly in the corner. The dress seemed to call out to her, and she couldn't resist trying it on. As she slipped into the delicate fabric, a wave of deep sadness washed over her, almost as if the dress carried the weight of 1,000 sorrows. She looked at herself in the mirror, her reflection showing a troubled expression she couldn't quite understand. Despite the unsettling feeling, Mia decided to purchase the dress. She convinced herself that it was just her imagination playing tricks on her. With the dress carefully wrapped, she carried it out of the shop, feeling a strange mix of excitement and unease. That night, as Mia drifted off to sleep, her mind was filled with thoughts of the dress. She had a vivid and haunting dream. In the dream, a ghostly figure of a woman with hollow eyes appeared, her presence both sorrowful and menacing. The woman whispered in a voice that sent chills down Mia's spine. "He was mine first." Mia woke up in a cold sweat, the words echoing in her mind, leaving her to wonder about the true history of the vintage dress she had brought into her life. From then on, strange things happened. The dress would move on its own. Mia would wake up with scratches on her arms. A voice would whisper Rachel's name in her ear while she slept. One night, Mia woke up to find the dress standing upright in the corner of her bedroom, casting an eerie shadow on the wall. The room was filled with an unsettling silence, broken only by the sound of her own breathing. She could feel a chill run down her spine as she stared at the dress, unable to move or look away. It was as if someone invisible was wearing it, the fabric swaying slightly as though moved by an unseen force. The dress seemed to have a life of its own, and the air around it felt heavy with a malevolent presence. Mia's heart pounded in her chest as she tried to rationalize what she was seeing, but deep down, she knew there was no logical explanation. That was the last straw. She had endured weeks of strange occurrences, from whispers in the night to objects moving on their own. But this was different. This was a direct confrontation with the unknown. Her fear turned into resolve as she decided she could no longer live in terror. She burned the dress in the backyard, and the haunting stopped. The flames consumed the fabric, and with it, the dark energy that had plagued her. As the dress turned to ash, Mia felt a weight lift off her shoulders. The air seemed lighter, and for the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of peace. The nightmare was finally over. But she'll never forget the last thing she heard before the flames consumed it, a whisper filled with rage. "You'll never be his first."